All right, next we'll be looking at vaccination. Okay, so for the origin of vaccines, how Dr. Edward Jenner discovered or created the first vaccines, right? And you should have watched the YouTube video that I inserted earlier. So I'll leave you to read the notes and learn through that YouTube video. Okay, I'm not gonna repeat that story lah. Okay, so I'll go straight to how vaccines work. Okay, so how vaccines work is really linked to what you have learned in part 1, in which you learned how the immune system work. You learned how the primary and secondary immune responses are triggered, right? So vaccination is really making use of our own immune system to create the immunity for the pathogen. Right, so what vaccination and what vaccines really are is that vaccines contains the antigens from whichever pathogens that we want to be protected against. Right, so the introduction of this vaccine would introduce the pathogen or the antigens of the pathogen, right, into the body. Okay, so the types of vaccines, right, there are different types. It can be the entire virus or bacteria that is already attenuated. Attenuated means it has a reduced ability to cause disease, to infect the cells. Right, some might be really 100% killed, right? 100% not able to infect our cells. Others may be still alive, but weakened, right? So does not really cause a serious disease, but may still have a bit of infection and replication inside the body. Okay, so that's for the entire complete pathogen kind of vaccines. Then we can have vaccines which contain only parts of the pathogen, right? But these parts, of course, should contain the antigens. Okay, so if you take a virus, for example, right, the antigens usually would be the viral glycoproteins if it is an enveloped virus. Right, so the vaccines can actually just be those viral glycoproteins, right? So it's like protein nature kind of vaccines. Or, of course, you should be very familiar, since this is the one that most of us have been given, right, for COVID, right? The genetic materials that codes for the antigens of the pathogen. The genetic materials can be mRNA, like the one that most of us have, or DNA. Okay, so because the vaccines are either just parts of the pathogen, not the complete ones, or even for those that are complete, they may be dead or weakened, attenuated, right? So by right, in theory at least, right, the vaccines shouldn't cause the disease that the actual pathogen would cause, right? And yet it can still trigger an immune response because the vaccines would be recognized as foreign, right? It does contains antigens of the pathogen, right? So the innate immune system will be triggered, which in turn, via antigen presentation, trigger the adaptive immune system as well, right? So all this you learned in part 1. I'm not going to repeat in so much details. Well, I'm just going to use this diagram that you have in the notes as well to just do a very quick, very brief consolidation of what we have learned in part 1. But with regards to the vaccines in this case, not the pathogen itself, but the vaccines. Okay, so the vaccines again will be considered or recognized as foreign. So a particular antigen presenting cell, in this case the dendritic cell, would phagocytose the vaccine, break it down, and present a particular peptide fragment of the antigen on the vaccine, which will be recognized by a specific naive helper T cell with T cell receptor that is specific for this presented peptide fragment of the antigen. Okay, so the helper T cell will be activated and release cytokines. And for a particular naive B cell that has the B cell receptor, the membrane-bound antibody, which is specific for this antigen on the vaccine as well, right? It will bind to the receptor and the B cell becomes activated together with the help of the cytokines from the helper T cell. Right, so after activation, clonal expansion would occur, and you learned about the affinity maturation as well, which occurs during the clonal expansion. Right, so at the end of clonal expansion, you have this pool of B cells, some of which would differentiate into the memory B cells, while others, most of them, would differentiate into the plasma cells to produce antibodies against this vaccine antigen. So the vaccine would actually be cleared as if it is a pathogen. It is something foreign, right? It will be cleared by the immune system. Okay, but at the end of this immune response against the vaccine, we have the memory cells that will persist in the body, right? They remain in the body, right? So they can then trigger a secondary immune response if the actual pathogen actually invade our body, because the actual pathogen would have the same antigens as that of the vaccine, right? So the memory cells, memory B cells, for example, would be able to recognize the antigens on the actual pathogen and trigger the secondary immune response, and you learn that the secondary immune response is much faster and much stronger and last longer, right, than the primary immune response. So that would effectively protect us against the actual pathogen, and we shouldn't get sick or not so severe disease, right, due to the actual pathogen. Right, so this is how the vaccines work to protect us. All right, then next up, we will look at what is known as herd immunity, right? So you can see from this diagram, right, herd immunity is when a lot of people in the community, in the population, is or are immune, either by vaccination or by infection. But of course, ideally, it would be by vaccination, so less people get sick, right? So when many people, right, what we call a critical portion of the people in the community, if they are vaccinated, right, then that would offer protection to those that are not vaccinated, because the chance of the spread of the pathogen or the disease is very low when most of the people in the community or in the population are already immune via vaccination to the disease. So that protect those that are not immune. Maybe they cannot take the vaccines for some reasons, right? So when enough of the people are vaccinated and immune, then the spread is stopped, right? And that also protects those that are not immune. So this is known as herd immunity. Okay, so the critical portion here, we have given a number, 85 to 95%, but really there's no fixed number. It depends on the transmissibility of the pathogen, right? If the pathogen is more transmissible, right, it is able to spread more effectively in the community, then we need more protection, right? More people to be immune. So the critical portion would be higher. Or if the vaccine is not as effective to protect against the spread of the pathogen, then obviously we need a higher portion to be vaccinated. Like for example, our COVID vaccine, right? It is more effective in protecting us against serious disease, serious symptoms, but not so effective in the spread of the virus. So you would have seen in the news that a fully vaccinated people do get infected and they do spread the virus, although they don't really develop a very serious effects of the disease, right? So with that, if that is the case, right, if the vaccine is not as effective in preventing the spread, then we need a higher critical portion to be vaccinated and immune. And also, of course, there may be a limit to how long this immunity lasts, even though in theory, right, when we have the memory cells triggered by vaccination, the memory cells should provide a lifelong protection because they do persist in the body, but practically sometimes for certain people the memory cells, the number will drop, right? So there would be this limit to how long the immunity lasts in some people and in some cases. Okay, so all this would affect the critical portion that is needed. So last time I checked, there is really no consensus, especially for COVID, right? That how much of the population needs to be vaccinated to reach this herd immunity. I don't think the scientists have agreed. And with the variants of COVID that keeps appearing, some of which are more transmissible, like Omicron, then this critical portion would increase as the variants appear, right? So the point is to get more, as much as possible, right, the population to be vaccinated, right, instead of stopping at a particular percentage. Yeah. All right, so that would be for vaccination. Okay.